Imagine waking up tomorrow and discovering that the place where you were born no longer exists. Not destroyed by a bomb, not leveled by a hurricane, but simply erased, deleted from the map by your own government. Your zip code revoked. Your street address rejected by every computer system in the country. Your home still standing, still solid, but according to the United States of America, no longer real. This is not science fiction. This is Centralia, Pennsylvania, and what happened here should terrify every American who believes that citizenship means something permanent. Centralia sits in Columbia County, deep in the anthracite coal region of eastern Pennsylvania. If you have never been to coal country, picture this: rolling green hills scarred with old strip cuts, where black veins of carbon hide just beneath a thin layer of topsoil. Narrow valleys where fog clings to the ridgelines at dawn, and the air tastes like wet iron and cold stone. The land here is beautiful and brutal in equal measure. Forests of oak and birch grow over abandoned mine entrances. Creeks run orange with mineral runoff. Row houses built so close together you could hear your neighbor sneeze through the wall. Churches on every other block. Saloons on the blocks in between. This was mining country, and the geography made it all possible. Millions of years of compressed plant matter created one of the richest anthracite deposits on the planet, stretching for miles beneath the surface of the Earth. Anthracite burns hotter and cleaner than any other coal, and America needed every ounce of it. The men of Centralia spent their lives pulling it out of the ground to fuel the railroads, the steel mills, and the factories that built the most powerful industrial nation the world had ever seen. Founded in 1854 and chartered as a borough in 1866, Centralia was built on a simple American promise. Work hard, mine deep, raise your children where your father raised you, and the land will take care of the rest. For more than a century, that promise held. At its peak, the town had 5 hotels, 7 churches, 27 saloons, 2 theaters, a bank, and 14 general stores. Over 1,000 people called it home. The streets had names that meant something: Locust Avenue, Wood Street, Center Street. Children walked to school every morning past the same corner store where their grandparents had bought bread decades before. The rhythm of life followed the shift whistle. Morning meant the smell of coffee and the sound of lunch pails clicking shut. Evening meant men gathering at the general store to talk about union meetings and baseball while their kids played in the street until dark. Women hung laundry on lines stretched between houses. Everyone knew everyone. When someone died, the whole town came to the funeral. When someone married, the whole town came to the dance. This was not just geography, this was belonging. But underneath every lawn, every garden, every foundation, stretched miles of hollow tunnels where the coal had been carved away over generations. The mountain was not solid, it was a labyrinth, and nobody imagined that this emptiness would become a curse. In May of 1962, the Borough Council hired 5 volunteers to clean up the town landfill before Memorial Day. The dump sat in an abandoned strip mine pit at the edge of town. To get rid of the trash, they set it on fire. Burning garbage was standard practice in small towns across America. But what nobody remembered, or nobody cared to check, was that the pit connected to an exposed coal seam. The fire crawled through a crack in the rock and disappeared underground. It never came back out, and it is still burning today, more than 60 years later. By 1963, the fire was spreading through the abandoned mine shafts beneath the town. They tried everything: trenches, water, excavation. Engineers drilled boreholes to measure temperatures and found readings that defied belief. Nothing worked. The fire kept moving, feeding on coal seams that stretched for miles, burrowing deeper into the maze of tunnels that connected beneath homes, beneath streets, beneath the very foundations of the town. By 1969, a gas station owner discovered that the temperature inside his underground fuel tank had reached 177 degrees Fahrenheit. He shut down immediately. The town begged for federal help. Washington sent studies and committees and reports, but no real money and no real solution. Through the 1970s, Centralia began to die in slow motion. Smoke seeped through cracks in the pavement. Sinkholes opened without warning in backyards and driveways. Then, in 1981, a 12-year-old boy named Todd Domboski was standing in his grandmother's yard when the ground collapsed beneath his feet. A steaming pit, 4 feet wide and 150 feet deep, opened up and nearly swallowed him whole. His cousin grabbed him just in time. When engineers measured the gases pouring from the hole, their instruments read over 900 degrees. That was the moment Centralia crossed from a local problem to a national emergency. The story hit newspapers across the country. Engineers estimated the fire had already consumed an area larger than several football fields and was advancing at a rate of roughly 75 feet per year, eating through coal seams that could sustain it for centuries. In 1984, Congress allocated $42 million to relocate the entire town. Residents were offered buyouts. Most took them. They loaded their lives into moving trucks and drove away from the graves of their parents, the porches where they had watched summer storms roll in, the yards where their children had taken their first steps. But a handful of people refused to leave. They were not radicals. They were not protesters. They were people like John Lokitis, who had lived in the same house his entire life. People like John Coddington, whose family had run the town store for 3 generations. They stayed because leaving would mean admitting that everything their families had built could be erased by accident and by bureaucracy. They stayed because home is not just a building. It is the weight of years and memory that no government check can replace. The final act of erasure came quietly. In 2002, the United States Postal Service revoked Centralia's zip code, 17927. Just like that, the town stopped existing in the eyes of every delivery company, every emergency dispatcher, every database in the country. The few residents who remained had to borrow a neighboring town's zip code just to receive mail. When they filled out forms, they listed themselves as living in a place the system said was not real. The borough government dissolved in 2013. The governor invoked eminent domain to seize all remaining properties. The last 7 residents fought back in court. They argued that they had maintained their homes, paid their taxes, and fulfilled every obligation of citizenship. They were not squatters. They were Americans, but the state's position was final. Centralia was uninhabitable. The fire could burn for another 250 years. There was no infrastructure, no services, and no future. The legal battle dragged until 2017, when a settlement allowed the remaining residents to stay for the rest of their lives, but prohibited them from passing their homes to their children or grandchildren. When the last resident dies, the deed transfers to the state. Centralia will finally, completely cease to be. And yet, right now, as you listen to this, there are people living there. They wake up every morning in houses the government considers condemned. They mow their lawns, they paint their shutters, they fly American flags. But when they call 911, the dispatcher has to search for their address manually because the system does not recognize it. When they order something online, customer service tells them their location does not exist. When they try to renew a driver's license, the clerk asks if they made a mistake. Every single interaction with the modern world forces them to prove that they are real in a place the state insists is not. The old streets are still there, cracked and buckled from the heat below. Some stretches of Route 601 have been permanently closed because the asphalt melts in summer. Tourists come to spray graffiti on the abandoned highway and take photographs. They walk through the cemetery where generations of miners are buried, Headstones bearing names like Maloney and Coddington and Andrade, names that once filled the pews of St. Ignatius Catholic Church. The church was demolished in 1997. Only the graves remain. The smoke still rises from fissures in the earth. In winter, the snow melts in strange patches where the ground is too hot to hold it. The air smells like sulfur. Visitors snap their photos and drive away. But the residents watch them go, knowing what the tourists see: a disaster, a cautionary tale, a failure. That is not what the people who stayed see when they look at the empty lots and the silent streets where no children play anymore. They see home. They see what was real, and they refuse to accept that a zip code or a census form or a court ruling can erase what they know in their bones to be true. This is not just a story about coal or fire or bad luck. This is a story about the most fragile thing in America, the thing we all take for granted until it disappears: belonging. We believe that citizenship is a permanent contract, that if we follow the rules, pay our taxes, and vote in elections, our place in this country is secure. That America remembers the people who built it. Centralia proves otherwise. A town can be unmade by a single administrative decision, and the people who live there can become invisible in their own nation without ever crossing a border. They did not break a law. They did not abandon their responsibilities. They simply lived in the wrong place at the wrong time, and for that, they were erased. The last residents know that when they die, no one will take their place. The houses will be bulldozed. The streets will be swallowed by forest. In a generation, nothing will remain but the cemetery and the smoke rising from a fire that has already outlived most of the people it displaced. And maybe that is the lesson. Not that communities can be destroyed, but that they can survive, stubbornly, defiantly, as long as one person remains to say, "We were here, we mattered, our lives were real." So here's the question that Centralia leaves us with, and it is a question for every American who has ever loved a place enough to fight for it. If the government decided tomorrow that your town no longer existed, that your address was invalid, that your home was condemned and your name removed from the record, what would you do? Would you pack up and leave? Or would you stay, plant your flag in the yard, and force the world to remember that you were real? Let us know in the comments.